Vault is arguably the most controversial tower. You either think they are a worthy candidate for S tier, or they are complete rubbish, and no in between. I think Vault's ranking among many deserves to be re-evaluated. I will briefly go over their stats, then go over how you should use them in your matches. I will also briefly touch on two other towers I feel like should be comparable to Vault. Vault is unlocked from beating Blastech Barrage on hard mode, with an additional cost of 400 coins. Blastech Barrage is one of the hardest maps in a game, with a boss that has 1,000,000 health. There is no alternative way to unlock them, like with Robux. Vault is a melee tower that shoots electricity doing chain damage. They also have an ability similar to Wizard, where it permanently boosts a stat, and acts more so an additional set of upgrades, rather than something temporary, like most abilities. For a map that difficult and its generic tower role and its overall controversial ranking among players, is Vault really worth it? This video is going to break down Vault and will probably make you reconsider his ranking. Level 1 Vault costs 170 mana, deals 2 damage, has a range of 3, a rate of 0.9 and a hit limit of 3. Vault, like most splash heroes, loses damage per enemy hit, which isn't really a big issue as is to be expected. The damage decreases by 10% for each enemy hit along the chain. This is the same for every single level. The chain range is also the exact same as the normal range value, which also gets boosted by Balloon Pal and other range support. They also naturally target the closest enemy, rather than the first, which isn't a big deal as it's a melee tower with multi-hit. Level 2 Vault costs 1.2k mana, deals 9 damage, has a range of 3.5, a rate of 0.7, and a hit limit of 6. If you get this early enough, it can deal with shrooms, spiders, and ghosts, or their equivalents. Average damage is similar to Dumpster Child's total damage, translated into a normal DPS tower. It mainly just comes from me eyeballing it, seeing how well it deals with enemies. There isn't any calculation. Level 3 costs 2.8k mana, deals 13 damage, has a range of 4.5, a rate of 0.55, and a hit limit of 9. There isn't really anything special about this level, it's just a better version of level 2, which I guess you could say for every tower and every level. Level 4 costs 5k mana, deals 19 damage, has a range of 5, a rate of 0.45, and a hit limit of 12. This level is actually pretty solid, and deals with most things you throw at it. Level 4 costs 6.8k mana, deals 22 damage, a range of 5.5, a rate of 0.35, and a hit limit of 15. This level unlocks the ability to place Vault points on the track. Vault will endlessly attack these and they'll chain onto other enemies and Vault points, basically increasing its range. Vault points cost between 3k and 19k in intervals of 4k mana. You can only place 5 in total, and this limit is global and isn't affected by Discount Dog. More on Vault points later. Vault's main purpose is to be a true jack of all trades. He can do early game, crowd control, and be used as a DPS tower with the ability. This section isn't going to be talking about the ability. Vault level 2 is really effective at dealing with enemies like ghosts, runes, and spiders because they can be two-shot. And they don't rely on a cooldown, and they have a fast attack rate, unlike Dumpster Child and Maitake, who are rather infamous for their subpar targeting to say the least. Despite what I've been saying about how it deals with the 3 fast enemies, it doesn't really work for tougher fast enemies like poltergeists and skeletons. With Dump and Maitake, they immediately do a lot of damage when they attack because it's a damage over time effect. Vault doesn't have this and instead relies on straight up DPS to do the job. They are basically a mix of an early game and a traditional DPS. Another tower that's similar to an early game and a traditional DPS is Keith. Keith has a lot more range, doesn't suffer from damage fall off, and overall is slightly better and more cost effective at his job. He, however, requires a bit more care into his placement, as he uses an actual projectile and can miss faster enemies. He also acts as a better bridge between early game and mid game, because he's one of the cheapest towers to place down in max. I'm not going to go over Branch and Soda Pop as they aren't really early game towers and we would be here all day. Another tower that's similar to Vault is Frank. Frank offers pure crowd control and outclasses Vault for enemies that surpass 10,000 health, like giant golems, big reapers, and giant goblins. He has a slightly worse early game being cheaper and twice as weak, along with level 1 through 2 being pretty much unusable. Level 4 Frank is about on par with level 3 Vault. Frank, however, has the edge when it comes to his damage at max and limit. Frank at max is just about on par with max Vault and is a bit cheaper. 6 Franks do about the same damage as 6 Vaults. Frank's limit is 11, meaning he does double the damage of Vault with a tiny bit better max cost efficiency, although with a slightly worse early game. However, he isn't really used much as an early game tower, and is often paired with Maitake, which does the early game for you, so this point is rendered obsolete. I did say the same for Vault, but with how Frank is more geared towards late game, this benefits him a lot more. There isn't really an entire list of support towers that have a notable interaction. Slime King works best as cleanup for when the early game tower misses or doesn't outright kill an enemy. Maitake can unstun Vault. Low range towers are really vulnerable to stuns. Stuns from Bite can also benefit Bolt a bit. It's kind of just something every melee tower benefits from. DPS interactions with Discount Dog, Spectre, and Balloon Pal are kinda just the same. Vault with every support does about 120 DPS. The limit with Discount Dog is about 840. For comparison, Frank does about 80 DPS with 50% more range compared to Vault. Frank limit with Discount Dog is about 960 and is a lot cheaper, which leads him to deal about 20k damage per enemy. Another comparison is Keith, which does 92 DPS. Keith's max DPS is 828 and is a lot cheaper, in fact way cheaper than both of them. The ability is where everything changes for Vault and makes them compete with his peers and even surpass them in a lot of aspects and basically becoming an entirely different tower. Vault points increase the range by making Vault chain onto them. Technically speaking, they use the chain range of Vault that's using them, instead of the Vault point itself, meaning that you don't need to boost them with Balloon Pal, which I see a few people do. I've used Vault for quite a bit, and I can usually eyeball placing Vault points optimally. Place them about like 2 studs away from the range, or use enemies being chained onto as a reference. Or you can use the 3 Balloon Pal slots to bypass trying to eyeball it entirely, so you have another use for them other than sending 3 bomb flows on the final wave. That works too, I didn't say you can't do it. This raises Vault's range and max damage by quite a lot, as he pretty much becomes a normal DPS tower, albeit with a pretty hefty price. This makes him on par with DPS towers while also having complete crowd control. Balloon Pal isn't really required to utilize Vault points, but it does require you to clump Vaults up and makes them really weird and uncomfortable to use. Anyways, Balloon Pal is a really good support tower for Vault, as it makes it easier for Vaults to use Vault points and boosts their range a lot more than 50%, as it also boosts the Vault points as well, allowing you to get even more range from them. Balloon Pal is pretty much required as a support because of how much better it is to use them. Remember when I said Vault's DPS 840 with every support? Now put that on a range comparable to Scientist. Vault's max damage without micro is about 40k damage, compared to Scientist, which I'd consider to be a baseline tower, is about 38k damage under the same condition. Additionally, you can micro Vault points for a boss to deal a lot more damage and basically double his max damage. Using this knowledge, you can pretty much solo most of the easier maps with just Vault as your main source of damage. Unlike other towers, microing is pretty much built into the tower, so you can still use stuff like Spectre ability. One last mention is pairing Vault with Quinn, using the same strategy of doing Spectre ability twice with Vault points, to squeeze even more damage than you already could. Vault can also clean up for Quinn, which is her biggest weakness, so you can make full use of her range and DPS. Something I forgot to mention is that Vault Point can pretty much double the range of Vault for only 3k mana, which can help a bit with faster enemies for a very cheap price. I've explained how Vault is an extremely versatile tower, but how should you use them in your games? Vault can technically handle every phase of the game, but a lot of the time there's a difference between placing them for early game and mid to late game because of the Vault points. You pretty much have to plan ahead where you want to place supports and vaults. This makes Vault points a bit more map specific. Maps with less space and that are few and far between make it hard to use Vault to its fullest potential. A lot of the time you have to place some Vault points a bit closer together in order to make the most out of its range, or on some maps you literally cannot place Vault points at all. Vault Chain also only goes down one path, so Vault in general would suffer from multi-lane maps and he doesn't really have that much potential. Vault points can still serve as extra boss damage for the crowd control tower, so it doesn't really hurt him as much as maps with bad spacing. This goes without saying, but smaller maps will also make Vault points kinda suffer, same goes for pretty much every tower with huge range. Vault points don't really make him viable on other maps, it just makes him more viable on the maps he was already kinda good on. On the opposite spectrum, instead of placing Vault points next to the path, you can place Vault points around curves to maximize coverage, much like how you do the same for other towers. On an extreme scale, you can build fences around Vault points to maximize damage output. Vault is a jack of all trades, master of none tower, meaning that using Vault for a specific purpose means that you will lose out on a lot of potential stuff, and you might as well use another tower. You want Vault for purely crowd control? You have Voka, Frank, Branch, and Soda Pop to do that specific thing. You want to use Vault for early game? You have Slime King, Dumpster Child, Keith, and Maitake. Rule of 3 be damned, there isn't really a tower that does long range and DPS the way Vault does, but is very expensive and isn't affected by discount dog. If you have a tower like Stellar or Wizard, which also requires upkeep like that, it's probably not the best idea to bring Vault unless you have enough mana. Vault kinda suffers from larger player servers in hero stacking. They pretty much end up having diminishing returns because Vault points need to be in range of a Vault for them to actually be used, and the Vault point limit is global. You can fit a max about 14 Vaults on a Vault point before you actually start reconsidering everyone using Vault. The space it takes up kinda makes them using Vault points kinda weird, and microing them to follow the boss would be weird too. Vault points are just much more comfortable to use when you don't have to deal with 5 other players doing their own thing, spamming fat towers like Fracture, Scientist, and Quinn on a tiny map. Vault's ranking. Vault is objectively and quite literally a jack of all trades tower. They can do early game, crowd control, and substitute for a DPS tower that does slightly more damage than a Scientist. Pricing isn't his best attribute, but its build up is smooth, so it makes up for it. Vault, if given the chance, can do the easier maps and all of the raid maps by himself and a few supports, which is pretty good. I'd rank them S tier. Vault is S tier. Getting a tower that can fill any role from the hardest map in the game is a pretty good deal, and fits the grind you do for them. Feel free to like and subscribe, it helps a lot and tells me you want more of what I do. See you later.